What's up everyone, this is Precog. I recently went to Japan on vacation and I had the opportunity to visit E-Earphone in Akihabara. E-Earphone is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, earphone stores in the world. And if you don't already know this, Japan is also probably one of the largest markets for portable audio. And because of this, manufacturers will often release exclusive releases for Japan that are sort of more catered towards Japanese audiences. So basically I went around the store for a couple of hours listening to a bunch of earphones, as many as I could, and what follows are the live impressions. Okay, so this is pretty cool. There are 6 floors to E-Earphone. The first one is wireless audio, entry audio, wired audio, high-end audio, secondhand outlet, and then they have hearing aid and ear impressions at the very top floor. So there's definitely quite a lot going on here. Finally had the chance to listen to the IER-M7. And I actually haven't heard the M9 in about a year, so I don't want to jump to conclusions, but honestly I think this sounds very, very similar. Very warm, full-bodied, a little bit of treble sparkle, but compared to the M9, I think that this has a little bit less upper treble extension, or at least that's what I recall from memory. Pretty solid overall, although of course I think this is sort of getting eclipsed in this day and age in 2023. I think this came out, it says in 2018, October 2018, which is pretty impressive that this is still kind of relevant today. So this is the Sony JustEar. It is the XJE-MH2RCBJ. Quite a mouthful. But according to my friend, these were only available as demo units previously and CIMs, but this is now released as a universal version. I've heard a lot of things about these IMs. I've always been curious about them. But if I'm being 100% honest, I don't think these sound very good. It's a very lower mid-range oriented signature, I'll say that. It's very, very warm, and it's to the point of which it sounds extremely bloated and the upper mid-range is scooped out as well. I want to say that maybe there's a little bit of emphasis at 5 kHz in the lower treble, but past that point, this really rolls off in the highs. So overall, I can't say I'm very impressed with these. Okay, so this is the Victor FW10000. It's a bit of a niche IM, but I can sort of see why. It sounds kind of similar, I think, to the FDX1 from JVC, and this is in the sense that it's a bit more of a quote-unquote analytical sound signature, where the lower mids are a bit flatter, it has a bit more emphasis on the upper mids, but I can definitely see the appeal of these. They have very, if you're after like a very snappy sound that sometimes people associate with dynamic drivers for like a sense of dynamics essentially, then these are a pretty solid solid bet. Whether they're worth, I think it's 200,000 yen though, is more up for grabs. So this is the Noble Ronin. I think this unit is a little bit finicky around the connectors because I hear like static sometimes sporadically. That being said, I will say that I was pleasantly surprised listening to these. They sound surprisingly balanced, which is not something that I associate with Noble's IMs. And at the same time, the staging on this, the imaging on it is pretty good. It's definitely above average in my opinion, and it sounds quite wide, especially in terms of the sides of the stage. Overall, I think that this is actually a pretty decent IM, although again, I think the price is going to be the main point of contention for most prospective buyers. But yeah, pleasantly surprised. All right, so I've just listened to my first Acoustune. This is the ACT-03, and it's a pretty interesting IM. One, I think this has probably one of the coolest designs that I've seen aesthetically. It's actually surprisingly comfortable as well. Now in terms of the sound, it is quite V-shaped, so it has a thicker lower mid-range, forward upper mids, and then the treble I think is a little bit over sharpened sounding. I suspect it has a peak at like 5 kHz and then maybe somewhere in maybe 10 kHz, it's past 10 kHz. Overall, definitely a very exciting IM. As for whether it's a good rendition of a V-shaped tuning, I think I would say it falls on the better end of the spectrum, but I think that it would also be polarizing for some listeners. Okay, so this is the FitEar TG335. I've been listening to these for about a minute, and I am not a fan. They sound very stereotypically like balanced armature IM sounded like 5 years ago. Very bloated, just sucked out upper mids, very little upper treble and energy in general. It just sounds muffled and boxy. I think that's the best way I can describe this. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. Okay, so I've just listened to my first Ultimate Ears IM. This is the Live. It is a pretty interesting IM. I feel like it has, I'm not sure what the tuning is. I feel like how can I put this? It's a hybrid for one. The bass sounds like a dynamic driver, but it sounds kind of textureless. It's not very, it doesn't have a lot of decay, and I suspect that this is a product of the treble response actually, which I think has more of an emphasis on the upper treble. So it's a bit more feathery, and then I think the lower treble around maybe 5 or 6 hertz, excuse me, is more dipped by comparison. Overall, this gives me, I can't really dislike it, but at the same time, it feels like it lacks soul, it lacks character, sort of like some of my CIMs, for example, that are dipped in those same regions in the treble and then are boosted. And I'm mostly speaking with respect to my U4S CIM. Okay, so this is the Vision Ears Meister? I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly. Anyways, this is a Japan exclusive IM. It sounds interesting. It's very V-shaped, much more so than I think some of their previous releases, which tend to go for more of a neutral warm signature in my opinion. But yeah, you can definitely hear the dynamic driver on this. It has a lot of driver flex, by the way, but they're definitely making it known. Moving upwards into the treble response, I think that this is where this IM sort of starts to fall apart. It's quite lower treble centric, around 5 kHz or so, which gives it a compressed sound to a lot of percussive hits. And then moving past that into the upper treble, I don't think it has as much extension as it might need to sort of pull off this type of sound signature. So overall, I think that this could definitely be an exciting listen on first listen, but as you start to listen more, the flaws start cropping up. So this is the QTC 8SS. I've actually never listened to the QTC 8 balanceometer models before, and I have to say, these are not bad at all. Very well tuned overall. It has I would say this is a neutral with bass boost sort of tuning, like most of the other QTCs, where the upper mid is a little bit, the upper mid range and the rise from 1 to 3 kHz is a bit more on the reserve side, and then there's some dipping at around 5 to 6 kHz in the lower treble. And basically what this means is that you can listen quite loud with these if that is sort of your thing. It's not really going to sound harsh or fatiguing, and it just sounds balanced overall. I don't love it. Like, I don't feel like there's something special about the sound that sort of hooks me in and makes me feel like the music is quote unquote alive, but overall very competent, and this doesn't make many mistakes. So this is one of QTC's latest releases. It's called the White Tiger. It is a 6 balanceometer to electrostatic driver configuration, and honestly, I'm not too sold on it. It sounds very boring and sort of tuned oddly, especially the treble. I think that the EST implementation on it is a little bit gimped, and this is in the sense that it's mostly like mid treble versus like upper treble, which is what you want to get out of the ESTs normally. And it actually reminds me a lot of the Anole VX V14 there that we have there. Just not the best implementation of the electrostatic drivers that I've heard. And I probably would not find myself recommending this IM. Okay, so I've just listened to the FitEar Artha and the Aurora. This is, I think, a bit of an unknown brand from the Philippines. And yeah, I think that the Aurora is probably actually not my favorite of the two. I actually prefer the Artha. The tuning of the Aurora is definitely quite wonky in my opinion. It has quite a lot of mid bass and lower mids, and then there's something off in the way it transitions from the upper mid range into the lower treble. So like from 3 to 5 kHz, it just sounds a bit sibilant, and the extension on it past 10 kHz is also really lacking for an IM that uses the electrostatic drivers. The Artha is tuned, I think, a little bit more conventionally, at least in the sense that it sounds more normal. It still has its quirks, but at the very least, I think I find it more palatable than the Aurora. That's just my first impressions. I'd be curious to see how these IMs measure. So I've just finished listening to 2 of the Kumitate IMs. These are IMs that you generally only see in Japan, although they are available for purchase through his website for international audiences. So this is the Lakh. It is tuned very similarly, I think, to a lot of the Final Audio IMs and the Moondrop IMs, for example. So it has more of an analytical sound signature where there is an emphasis on the mid-bass and there is more emphasis on the upper mid-range. Overall, this definitely is not my my thing really when it comes to tuning, but I do see sort of the appeal for this when it comes to certain genres and for certain listeners. Now, this one is the REF, and honestly, I think that I prefer the Lakh over it. The REF definitely has more of a focus on the lower mid-range. It's a lot thicker down low. However, when it comes to the lower treble, it is a very intensive IM. There's so much energy at 5 and 6 kHz, and this lends to, at least in my opinion, or to what I heard, a good deal of sibilance on certain tracks. And yeah, that's sort of my take on these two Kumitate IMs. Unfortunately, they don't have I think it's the Sirius, which is one of their other IMs that is pretty well regarded. So I've just wrapped up my tour of E-Earphones. Basically went through and got to see every floor, which is really cool. I think this is definitely one of the sort of the meccas for audio. There's so much in this store. They have IMs, they have headphones. I think they even have a few speakers in the used section. So just no shortage of audio stuff, audio gear, and I would definitely recommend checking this store out if you are in Japan.